If you like audiobooks or audio shows, check out a free trial of Audible. Just click the link in the description.
Welcome to MINDSHOCK. In this episode, I'm going to be attacking the conspiracy theorists a little bit. With the imaginary lines that they draw, lines in the sand that are drawn basically arbitrarily, or more accurately, in line with the cognitive dissonance of conspiracy theorists themselves and their own fallacious reasoning in certain regards. And I will be delving into that topic. Some people think I spend all the time dissecting and making objective observations about coincidence theorists, but I fully recognize the issues that many conspiracy theorists have. I mean, a lot of these issues are simply human issues. Some humans, of course, more naive than others. Some humans more illogical than others. As always, if you enjoyed the podcast, you can donate to our PayPal. Just check the link in the description. Make sure you subscribe to the channel. Hit the bell for notifications. If you like the podcast, hit the like button. Share it across social media platforms, of which you can find us on Twitter, Facebook, Reddit, Patreon. Patrons, you get priority for a case topic, co-podcast, or logical analyses requests, and depending on your tier, you could also be a guest on the podcast. You could also have your questions answered in priority fashion. Questions, comments, theories, thoughts, suggestions, rebuttals, debunkings of any kind, leave them in the comment section. All right, so here's the deal. How often have you heard a supposed conspiracy theorist say, oh, the government would never do that, or the corrupt profiteers, I mean, they definitely would commit some kind of conspiracies, but they definitely wouldn't cross that line. Now, what line? The imaginary line in the feeble minds, feeble to semi-feeble minds, of who's ever making that determination. And it's really bizarre because it's so silly, especially when people appeal to motive. I mean, coincidence theorists usually do that. It's like, oh, well, why would they lie? Well, again, the problem with appealing to motive is, A, you might not know the motive. The motive is some kind of top secret motive. Obviously, if the conspiracy is true, the motive would have to be good enough to perpetrate the conspiracy, which might be expensive. So, and again, obviously, if they're raking in more money than they're using to perpetrate the conspiracy, obviously, then it makes sense. But you in the position that you're in, as a civilian without top secret clearance or above top secret clearance, whatever's required to know the motives, and even then, with some of these conspiracies, even above top, I mean, they might be individuals operating way above the very notion of clearances, where even the people holding the highest military and military intelligence clearances, even they don't know. I mean, if the conspiracy is true, I mean, that's very possible. But what I'm going to focus on is conspiracy theorists themselves. I mean, coincidence theorists use this a little bit. Every now and then they maybe say, oh, well, yeah, they know about one or two conspiracy, usually something that lines up with their biases. Or if there's a particular industry that they don't like, something that lines up with their biases. They'll buy into, okay, whatever, that might be true. But there's no way all these other conspiracies are true, as if they have a way of knowing that, but usually they don't even research that. Now, with conspiracy theories, this is what I'm going to focus on. It's been referred to in the meme world as diet woke. So, for example, many conspiracy theorists are suspicious of government entities, whatnot. They think 9/11's an inside job. But vaccines definitely are legitimate, perfectly safe, and there would never be any kind of conspiracy within the CDC or vaccine manufacturers and lobbyists and government agendas and any kind of conspiracy crossover into academia. They definitely have some kind of weather modification with HARP. There might be aliens masquerading as the president, but vaccines, no. They would never lie about that. It's really funny to see where different people's lines in the sand are. And if they're really arbitrary, just based on biases and triggering, I mean, obviously a parent who's had many kids vaccinated or even a doctor, maybe even a conspiratorial doctor, they really can't handle if there is a vaccine conspiracy, and I'm not saying there is, but if there is, and they're very dangerous and they're responsible for all of these health issues, if not most health issues that people have, that's a tough pill to swallow, especially for most parents. Unless the parents have lived through it and they saw the damage of the vaccine, they know a lot of these parents, especially that are advocating for vaccine safety and for real science instead of scientism, they're the ones that have been personally affected by vaccine injury. And before the vaccine injury, a lot of these people, they're textbook coincidence theorists, very cognitive dissonant, very indoctrinated into the cult of state and authority worship. But when something really, really impactful, I mean, that's usually what it takes to have the so-called awakening. So where diet woke comes in is you believe the government, for conspiracy theorists to believe the government can do all these other things, but they would never, I mean, forget the tobacco industry, the sugar industry, all of their fake science and hoodwinking, the medical industry into it, all of that, the big pharma cartel, and maybe the government is run by reptilian aliens, but vaccines, that's just a bridge too far. It's really interesting the way some people's brains work and how their personal biases affect where they draw these lines in the sand. Now, with flat Earth, that became very, very blatant in where, I mean, the vaccine is one of the biggest ones. I mean, climate change, sort of. There's a lot of non-conspiracy theorists who are really doubting the climate change agenda just because of how transparent all the tax lobbyists are. Again, this is independent of whether or not man-made climate change is a real threat or not. Whether that's true or false, just the way the tax lobbying is being done is so obvious, relying on scientism instead of real science. Because even if the real science is there, that's not what's being used to propagate the climate change hoax per se. And by hoax, I mean the hoodwinking of the public, not that it's not true. It could be true. So same thing with vaccines, whatever. But the way that people's brains work, where they have to dismiss whatever they can't handle, because again, their subconscious has recognized that what the limit of their brain can handle. So to protect the psyche, these are defense mechanisms. Again, anybody studying basic psychology, this is all very evident. And obviously, conspiracy theorists are not exempt. Conspiracy theorists are human beings. They have these biases and also these defense mechanisms, but it's kind of, they're a little bit more hypocritical. So like hardcore coincidence theorists, they're so thoroughly indoctrinated into the cult of state and authority worship and scientism, they're literally sheep. They believe whatever they see on the idiot box. But or whatever somebody in a special white lab coat says, it must be true. So ignoring, again, all logic, reason, psychology, history, all of these things, just the very nature of human beings, the fallibility of human beings. But conspiracy theorists are a different breed. They recognize all of these things that coincidence theorists do not, but they hypocritically make these lines arbitrarily, in a triggered fashion, make these lines in the sand. And the flat earth is probably one of the most triggering, whereas the government might lie about everything, but NASA's beyond reproach. The Church of NASA, they would never preach something that was not divine gospel. So, and the priests of NASA, of course, would never mislead the public. And what's even funnier are the people that believe the moon landing was faked, but don't believe that the flat earth conspiracy would ever be perpetrated. Now, I agree in the sense that the reason, the motive, which is obviously irrelevant to whether it's being done or not, but the motive would have to be pretty good to facilitate this. That obviously that doesn't mean we would be able to know the motive. It's like, it's really bizarre. The illogicality of coincidence theorists, some conspiracy theorists use the same fallacious reasoning. Like, if, again, I've heard this example used by many different people, it's a pretty good one. If you stumble upon a dead body and you're a detective and you see, okay, well, you see the crime has been perpetrated, knowing why it was perpetrated, you examine the evidence, but the motive, knowing why, that's not physical evidence. That's just something for a nice little bow tie in your own head just to make sense of a situation. And human beings, part of psychology, human beings like things to make sense. Obviously, whether or not that correlates with reality is a completely separate issue. Most often it doesn't. People need their faith-based worldviews to soothe them because, of course, they don't want the truth. They don't want their illusions shattered. And these are all obviously all quotes from wisdom that is not new. It's not new, but it's kind of amusing to see conspiracy theorists, especially because they pride themselves on being these free thinkers and open-minded and critical thinkers, and they are in many respects, or at least a lot more than coincidence theorists, but they still fall for some of these same traps and pitfalls of logic that coincidence theorists fall to, but they have to be held even more accountable because of the added hypocrisy. Because if they already realize the same arguments they use with coincidence theorists, the different divides that exist among conspiracy theorists are very blatantly obvious. And obviously, also, I'd be remiss not to mention controlled opposition and gatekeepers and shills, basically so called establishment puppets that propagate a certain amount of conspiracy theories, both true and untrue. And they're okay with a certain amount of truth being revealed. But again, as a gatekeeper, there are certain gates that you can't go beyond. That would be considered crazy, even within the spectrum of conspiracy theorists. And that's why this is, again, as someone who's more of a fence sitter, if you haven't checked out my Real Fence Sitters podcast, check that out. I go over why true fence sitters are so rare, and most people want to just desperately, dogmatically, religiously cling to some kind of side of an argument or pick some kind of team, instead of just hanging back and objectively observing everything. The fallible humans on both sides of all issues. So, same thing with conspiracy theorists, just the way that the argumentation they use, even within certain conspiracies, like we can go 9/11. If you haven't checked out the MINDSHOCK 9/11 podcast, we started covering that. I will be doing a follow-up episode with Sid Irwin regarding Building 7, so that's coming up. But yeah, within this conspiracy, the group of conspiracy theorists who refuse to believe the silly coincidence theory that is the official narrative with unscathed paper passports, surviving infernos that incinerated fireproof steel, and caused collapses that have never in the history of the world been done by, regarding buildings that were specifically built to withstand multiple plane impacts, tornadoes, hurricane winds, all these things. But anyway, within that group of conspiracy theorists that believe 9/11 was an inside job, and if you haven't checked out the 9/11 Mindshock podcast, I of course go into the official coincidence theory could be completely false, and the U.S. government could still be innocent. Again, I might be one of the only people that considers such a theory, but anyway, there are groups that say, oh, well, yeah, 9/11 was an inside job, but the planes weren't real. They were not physical planes. They were hologram planes. Or there were no planes at all, and it was all CGI on the news, and the news broadcast was on a delay, and it wasn't really live, etc., etc. Now, within that group, they say, oh, well, they would never fake it to that extent. Well, I mean, yes, we can appeal to incredulity, which is a logical fallacy, and obviously there's the fallacy that just because it's a logical fallacy doesn't mean it's untrue. Maybe they wouldn't. But it's almost an arbitrary line in the sand, because if military tech is roughly 50 years ahead of civilian, we already know that hologram tech in excess of what was required was already around in at least the early 90s. So it's possible that they did it. Now, whether or not they would do it or not, coulda, shoulda, woulda, has nothing to do with whether it was actually done. So they're saying they wouldn't do it. Maybe, maybe not. You wouldn't know. But it's just really interesting to see how everyone's cognitive dissonance and biases manifests even within a group of conspiracy theorists. It's very amusing. That's why, again, I advocate logical, neutral, objective thinking, scientific method with controls, not falling for any of these logical fallacies or other psychological pitfalls that prevent one from being able to discern what reality really is. And all of these factors obviously are at play. But drawing imaginary lines in the sand, it's really bizarre. And then when it happens within groups of conspiracy theorists, even ones that believe in the conspiracy, I mean, we can go crazy into the vaccine one, where some conspiracy theorists believe vaccines are loaded with metals and other nanotechnology to control people via 5G or even old 4G or 3G, who knows. There's different levels of every conspiracy, and you have conspiracy theorists drawing these lines where, like, yeah, the government would lie, but not to this extent. They would perpetrate something, but not to this extent. As if they could know what extent that would be too. It's silliness all around. Again, the purpose of MindShock is, of course, to get to the truth with logic and reason at the forefront without falling for any logical fallacies. And conspiracy theorists also fall for logical fallacies, and that needs to be exposed as well. Again, objectivity and neutrality is paramount if someone is really interested in the truth, instead of just soothing their dissonance or indulging their cognitive biases. So, yeah, feel free, the audience, both coincidence theorists and conspiracy theorists alike, can chime in on what they thought of this podcast and these imaginary lines that are drawn by all parties in all things. If you enjoyed the podcast, you can donate to our PayPal. Just check the link in the description. Make sure you subscribe to the channel. Hit the bell for notifications. Make sure you allow your device to have those notifications come through. If you're not getting notifications, you can just go directly to the MindShock YouTube channel, youtube.com/MindShock, and you could just manually go to videos and see all the podcasts there. Questions, comments, theories, thoughts, suggestions, rebuttals, debunkings of any kind, leave them in the comment section. If you like this podcast, hit the like button, share it across social media platforms, of which you can find us: Twitter, Facebook, Reddit, Patreon. Patrons do get priority, case, topic, logical analysis, co-podcaster requests, or have a guest spot on the podcast. This is Bruce McGuire signing off. Catch you guys next time.